This is Miss Pac-Man. This actually has a fairly interesting release schedule. So the arcade port of this came out in 1982. I believe it was just a year or so after the original Pac-Man. And when it came to consoles, it came out on the Genesis in 1990. But it didn't actually come to the Super Nintendo until 1996. And fairly late into 1996 at that. So this is actually one of the last games that ended up coming out for the console. So, in Miss Pac-Man we have 4 modes. We have arcade mode, which is the standard arcade stages. We have mini mode, which are smaller scale stages. We have big mode, which is larger stages, and then we have strange, which is what we're doing right now. These are basically some really off-the-wall stage designs, and actually has a combination of stages from the other modes as well. Alright, so we're going to be playing on the easy difficulty. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So, 3, 2, 1, go. So, if you're familiar with the original Pac-Man, you might recognize these ghosts as Blinky, Pinky, Inky, and Clyde. In Miss Pac-Man, they are actually the same. The only difference is Clyde has been replaced with Sue. But generally speaking, their behaviors and patterns are about the same. So, Blinky will go after you in a direct pattern once you go into what is called chase mode, where Blinky's target is actually going to be Miss Pac-Man directly. Pinky is going to have a target of 4 spaces in front of Miss Pac-Man. Inky has a path that is determined based off of where you are as well as where Blinky is. And then Sue is basically going to try to go around you, kind of like how Blinky does. But once you get close enough, then they change. Sue's mode changes to go to the corner. So, the first couple stages are fairly straightforward and basic. And the same things here are as usual. You eat a power pellet, you get faster and get the ghosts. And we're going to actually show a couple of little cute cutscenes they have in the game. So this is the first one. This is where we see Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man actually meet up for the first time, getting chased by the two ghosts. Now, I will point out, because I'm sure some people probably remember how there was a way that you could manipulate the ghost's behavior patterns in order to basically constantly keep them in a specific way for the sake of like getting a high score. Unfortunately, Miss Pac-Man does not work the same way. The patterns are actually semi-deterministic, which means they have a bit of RNG to it as well. So the same patterns that you would use in regular Pac-Man, you can't actually use in order to like guarantee the ghost will behave a certain way. And my controller is acting a little goofy. I don't know why that's happening. But yeah, the layouts of these stages are definitely more of an oddball than the other stages. And as much as of a headache as it can be, it's something that I thoroughly enjoy. As a kid, I remember a lot of these stages were a lot more difficult, which, I mean, I guess in the eyes of a kid, that would make sense. Now, we use the power pellets in a certain way to help out a little bit here. So, as you can see, whenever the ghosts are actively going after you, if you eat the power pellet, they will actually do a 180 and turn around while being vulnerable. But if they're already vulnerable, they won't change direction, which is kind of nice, because if you can chain the power pellets, then you can actually keep yourself fairly safe. Now, this is one of the first quote-unquote dangerous levels, just because the upper area is an area that the ghosts like to congregate around, and eventually you will have to go up there. And that's going to be our first death. Whoops. Now, I'll say this. There is going to be a few deaths in this run. Because of the fact that the patterns of the ghosts are not always the same all the time, it makes it a fair bit harder to actually... It makes it harder to actually, like, determine and keep track of what they're doing. And right here we have a pretty rough pattern, honestly. But it's okay. And the good thing is, this isn't... Oh, whoops, I accidentally skipped one of the cutscenes. My bad. I'm too used to the regular gameplay. But basically, the cutscene was just like a 20-second cutscene of Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man chasing each other around. So, I mean, realistically speaking, you don't really miss a whole lot. I do apologize for that mistake, though. Can you tell I'm not used to this kind of thing? So, something that you might have noticed while we were going through the first few stages is the power pellets have been having varying levels of effectiveness, and that's actually a part of the challenge here. So, for the first 5 stages of the game, the power pellets go from working a fairly long time... Oh, ooh, managed to dodge. They go from managing to work for a fairly decent amount of time, I believe like 6 or 7 seconds. That was close. And eventually they slow down to only working for, roughly about 1.5 seconds. And there are certain levels that 1.5 seconds definitely is gonna make it a lot scarier. But they are fairly nice in terms of where they give you the more effective power pellets. Like, as we saw, level 6 had a level that had a good power pellet. Our next good power pellet is going to be in level 10. Okay, we're gonna bow out of there. And then they actually have a stretch of decent power-ups further down the road. And another thing they have at random are these items that pop out throughout the level. So the original Pac-Man has the items go as far as the bananas, as you can see on the visual. But they actually go from 8 to 14 with new higher level items. So like, for example, the last one was a milk carton that was worth 3,000 points. Level 9, we have an ice cream cone, which is worth, I believe it's 6,000 points? Or 4,000 points, one or the other. I think 4,000. Okay, so I'm gonna put my controller down for a second so we can see this third cutscene, because I'm a goofball there. And we get to see Baby Pac-Man show up. So a lot of these stages are actually fairly big in general, and in fact, you would see a couple of these in big mode. But I will say it's always interesting to see the kind of stages they came up with for these things, especially knowing that, like, for Strange Mode especially, there's a few that you will not see in other categories at all. So here we have the item that pops up, which I still am not entirely sure what that's supposed to be. I think it's supposed to be like a burger and something else, but it's hard to tell. And as a kid, I always thought it was a Sphinx. So level 11 has the power-ups not really worked that long. And thankfully, it is a short enough and easy enough stage to understand what you're doing. And they actually have a fairly straightforward star here as their item, which is kind of easy to understand. Now, unlike some of the other stages, this is one of those where it's really difficult. It's actually really difficult because there are spots that are 2 spaces wide. So you can actually go back and forth in the same area and have trouble moving. And if you're not careful, you could get caught trying to navigate through there. Now, this level is fairly easy to understand, but it's also one of the more stressful ones, just because of how much you have to collect in a given area. And with only 4 power pellets, there is very much not a lot of room to work with, room for error here. And unfortunately, I took a gamble and it did not pay off. There are some times where you could slip through and kind of pass through a ghost without hitting its hitbox. And then there are certain times where you will not have that luxury. And in fact, in the higher difficulties, that luxury disappears a lot faster. So we're gonna basically kind of we're gonna kite the ghosts a little bit to where they'll follow me and I can get away, which always a good idea to have always a good idea to remember these little secret passages, because it could definitely help if you're trying to get not only to the other side of the stage faster, but also try to get the ghosts trapped in there. Because generally speaking, unless they're going from scatter mode to chase mode, they're not gonna reverse course once they go into those secret passages, so it can buy you a few seconds. Also, that ding you heard was actually us hitting the threshold for another life. So, in this game, you get an extra life once you hit 10,000 points, 50,000 points, 100,000 points, and 300,000 points. Realistically speaking, 300,000 points is not happening unless you're trying to basically maximize your score. Assuming you don't have a game over, you will probably end up hitting 100,000. At least in this mode and big mode, you will. Mini and arcade, you might not. So, as you can, I'm sure you've noticed, a lot of these stages get a lot more grandiose and honestly kind of tricky. And it kind of makes for a scary mid-game, because the latter stages are actually not that bad. Now, thankfully, our last cutscene is actually at the very end of the game, and it's not skippable, so, well, yeah, it's actually not really skippable, so we're gonna be a little, we don't have to worry as much now. Oh. This area can easily get you killed if you're not careful with where you're going. And that's gonna be a slight annoyance. Okay, we actually got out of there, which is kind of nice. The nice thing is, this version and the Genesis version of Miss Pac-Man are pretty much identical. They're, like, I want to say the brightness might be a little bit different on the Genesis version, but other than that, like, the layouts, the items, everything else is going to be the same. Alright, so now we're into level 17, so we're officially halfway through, and I'm going to be honest, this is my least favorite level of them all, for two reasons. Number one, as you can see, it's a fairly large and complicated stage, and a probable pain in the butt to go through usually, but there's one other detail. Take a look at the ghosts. Yeah, the power pellets in level 17 do not work at all. They will make the ghost reverse course, but they will not actually help you in terms of making them vulnerable. And I knew I was going to die there. So, the good thing is that, unlike the arcade version of the game, where, if I remember correctly, I believe it follows Pac-Man's pattern of 17 and onward not working with power pellets at all anymore. But on top, thankfully it doesn't actually do that, and instead it only happens for this one stage. It goes back into regular patterns for 18 and beyond, which is very nice because there's a few of these stages where having no power pellets at all would be an absolute nightmare. Speaking of a nightmare, this is a difficult stage because you have an entire half of the stage to go through with no power pellets whatsoever. And unfortunately, I thought I was gonna be faster than Sue there, and turns out I was wrong. Oh yeah, if you're not careful, these ghosts will get you pretty fast, and the fact that you can't just constantly trick them into moving how you want makes things a lot more difficult than you would think. And then when you accidentally leave a dot or two in random areas like that, it also makes it difficult. But we're out of there, so that's okay. Now there is, yeah, we are on our last life, which kind of a concern, especially because we are still a little bit away from, whoops. Okay, that was completely unintentional. So we game over, which is disappointing, but the game is actually fairly forgiving. We have a continue system. You actually have a total of 4 continues to work with on top of your regular first set of lives, and it will let you continue from the level you died in, you game overed in. Now, once you run out of continues, you can continue back, but the furthest you can go before you, the furthest you're allowed to start from is actually going to be level 7. And it's actually not really an arbitrary pick, because you're able to actually start from level 7 starting out if you want, but because this is, you know, a speedrun, you don't want to do that. You have to start at level 1. But yeah, so realistically speaking, you actually have quite a good bit of cushion here compared to the arcade mode. So realistically speaking, unless you just are dying constantly and have really bad luck, you should be able to finish the game in a single sitting. So this is level 20, and this actually starts what I call easy street, quote unquote, because just like how we had the power pellets work for a while and slowly descend in effectiveness in levels 1 through 5, this actually works here in levels 20 through 24. So we actually have a good bit of time to work with here, because the power pellets will actually help us out for once. Oh. I accidentally hit the wrong key on my touchpad. Whoops. And I will say, too, as a kid, looking at levels like level 21 here in the dark was so satisfying. Like, the glow on the TV was always such a fun, was like such a fun little memory for me. Oh. And as I'm reminiscing, my control is starting to waver on me. Which, again, in easy mode, it's not that bad. Once you get into the higher difficulties, though, it's going to be a lot less forgiving for you. And I'm going to say the RNG for these ghosts is really helping out in not letting us get killed here. And you could just tell this was a 90s port with all of the bright neon colors and goofy little items and animations and whatnot. It's always, it's an easy way to tell when something is like, you could tell something's from the 90s when they have these kind of bright colors going on. And I will say, there's something oddly satisfying about even these kind of stages where they're not uniform. There's something satisfying about just being able to, like, run through them without thinking too much. And just enjoying the repetitive motion, you know? RNG is definitely acting a little suspect here, but not too bad. Oh, and as I say that, we have another death. Oh yeah, easy mode is definitely convenient for this. It's super duper convenient just because of the fact that, like, once you hit normal mode and higher, it's faster. It is a decent little bit faster, but you could definitely feel the difference in the speed, because the main difference is you start off a little bit faster, but the ghosts themselves get progressively faster. Now, for this stage specifically, it's nice because I've noticed the ghosts don't ever seem to start moving in the left or onto the right-hand side of the stage right off the bat. So it makes for a fairly easy bit of route planning when you want to figure out where you want to go. Because you could clear out the entire right side in the time it takes for them to get out of the left side to start moving towards you. Okay, so level 25, this is another stage that actually has the power pellets work a decent amount of time, which is nice because this is going to be one of the last stages that does that. There's only one more stage with a quote-unquote good power pellet, and we definitely want to make sure we take advantage of that to not only calm down, but also just kind of think about what we're going to do, think about our plans for the next set of stages. At the moment, there are actually no runs in hard mode, so the difficulties actually go from easy, normal, hard, and crazy. Right now, there are actually no runs from anyone on any difficulty higher than normal, and even then, only for strange mode does anyone have a normal run submitted yet. But I've tinkered around in the higher difficulties, and let me tell you, it is definitely a jarring difference. Like, I did a goof off crazy run in here a little bit ago while practicing, and I made it to level 19 before running out of game overs entirely. So, considering how many deaths I've got here, I think you can get a rough idea of how insane the movement is in Crazy then. Oh, I almost got caught right there. So, now, I made a mistake in not hitting those last pellets a second ago, and the problem with that is, if you leave only a few dots in a given area, the ghost will typically try to focus in that area. Oh, and I got stuck again. Oh, trust me, I fully intend to do a crazy run at some point. It's just a matter of I need to be able to actually complete the entirety of the levels in order for it to actually count. So this is the last level that actually has the power pellets working for a good little while. So we're gonna accept this as a nice little reprieve, because now we have 3 last levels to go, and they are all fairly difficult. Well, I say that. This one is short, but it's slightly difficult just because of the fact that the ghosts don't have as much room to wander around, and as a result, they can kind of bunch up. Oh, and just like that, we got our 50,000 points again. So we have 2 levels left, and unfortunately, the second to last level is a repeat of stage 12, which is personally one of my least favorite stages. But we've gone through a lot worse, and we can make it through. The only thing is, we have to be very mindful of where the ghosts are coming from. Oh, that was a close one. Alright, and whew, we are out of there, so that's good. So this is our final level. And yeah, I'm going to tell you right now, this one, I don't think it's necessarily enough to warrant a seizure warning, but it's definitely a bit sketchy that they had this at the very end. Like, I feel like this kind of thing would probably not have gone over well nowadays. Oh my goodness, that... I slipped and hit the wrong button. But that is time. How did I hit the wrong key again? So, here's our last cutscene. It's the end. And it's basically just Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man waving us goodbye. And we get to see a nice little scene of them at the beach with their kids, with their Pac kids. Let me tell you, it definitely gets scary when you see, it's honestly scary with how fast these ghosts can go. But thank you guys for allowing me to show this off. I really enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed being able to show this for SNES Super Stars. This is something that Pac-Man in general tends not to get a whole lot of attention, and Miss Pac-Man especially seems to be kind of ignored. Heck, even Pac-Man, even Namco at this point kind of ignores Miss Pac-Man entirely. I think it's probably some kind of license or royalty issue, but I really had a lot of fun with this. I really am glad I got to show this off. And honestly, I feel like if you want to give this game a try, go ahead. If you want to get it in person, it's insanely cheap. It's like, you could usually find a copy of it for like $5 or $10 at like a Play and Trade or something like that. And I mean, it's just a lot of fun. It's just a really fun little game, and it's not all that... It really isn't that difficult to handle. And of course, if you want to go for a score challenge, you can always do that too. So, but, I mean, with that being said, we've got ourselves a Super Metroid run that's about to start, and I'm excited to see how that works out. So, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed the remainder of the SNES Super Stars marathon, because we have quite a few games left on this schedule, and they're all going to be a hoot. So, thank you guys.